please join me in a moment of silent prayer or reflection? Thank you. Can we go ahead and do roll call, please, here?
Pat Rooney.
Here.
Alan Ward.
Here.
John Maston.
Here.
Kathy Cox.
Here.
Nicole Cohen.
Here. Can you please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? I
pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Do I have a motion to review and accept today's agenda?
So moved.
John Maston.
Yes.
Pat Rooney.
Yes.
Alan Ward.
Yes.
Kathy Cox.
Yes.
Nicole Cohen.
Yes. Okay, our only action item for this meeting, our preliminary audit wrap-up with Heinfeld and Meach. Heinfeld, Meach and Company, Mr. Murray.
Madam President, members of the board, it's recommended at this time that we go ahead and move forward with a presentation of the audit process to date with Heinfeld Meach. In September, they began their on-site audit process, and they have returned again for the second part of that process and have been here all week. So I would like to just introduce Melanie Askew from Heinfeld Meach, and she would go ahead and introduce your team if you'd like, and I will turn it over to you.
Awesome. So I think I've done this, 7 years now probably, so a lot of you already know me. But I've been actually doing audits for about 10 years, and I've had the joy of working with our engagement partner here, Mike Lazon, for all of those. And he's kind of our go-to guy on everything, so we're going to be kind of double teaming this whole presentation. So do you want to start off? No? All right. He's going to just throw me out there on this. So this is just a little bit about us as far as a firm. This is all we do. All we do is audit government and nonprofit type agencies. So if you're looking for a tax accountant, we're not your people. I don't even do my own taxes. I pay somebody for that because that's not what I do. But this is our lifeblood and we really enjoy it. Every time we come out here, I am always impressed with how wonderful the staff is, how welcoming you guys are, how willing you are to run around in circles, get us a million things, and help provide us with the information we need to do our jobs, and also how receptive everybody is to us telling you everything you've done wrong. Because when you think about it, that's a hard job for us. We come in and all we do is tell people what they do wrong. We don't often get to say what you do right. I'm hoping we can kind of at least touch on some of that today, but it will be a little bit about kind of some of those areas of improvements and things that can be worked on. So last year we did like kind of a big presentation about what all the audits were, what they meant. I didn't think maybe you guys wanted to go through that every year, but I did want to just touch on it for maybe some people who haven't been through this. When we come out, we're not actually performing an audit. We sit there and say, oh, we're going to do your audit. We're actually performing 3 audits. So one of them is the typical, like most people think of for businesses and corporations. It's a financial statement audit. We're making sure that all the numbers actually tie out in the report to the support. So if you say you have $1 million in the bank, can we reasonably say that there's $1 million? That kind of thing. We're also doing a federal compliance audit. So because you spend more than $750,000 of federal dollars every year, the federal government wants that audited. So we pick a few different programs. There's actually a whole system we have to follow to pick those so that we're getting different ones every year and kind of looking at different things every year. So we do that one, which is a lot of fun for your federal grants people and probably less of a headache for the rest of you. And then there's the fun one, the USFR, which is the Uniform System of Financial Records. And we're going through, and this is really the one where we're doing the bulk of our actual detailed work. There's I don't know how many questions there are,
Close to 300, yeah.
Yeah, it's right around a 300 question questionnaire. And we have to go through and be able to answer yes or no to every single one of those questions. So this is really where most of you have probably provided us with lots of stuff, and we've had to look at it and probably ask for more and come back and forth on it several times. So, you know, when you realize that's 2 weeks of us coming out here bothering everybody, we know that's pretty tough, and we appreciate that. And hopefully it does a pretty good job of helping you find those areas that maybe you can work on, or those areas where you're doing things right. So just keep kind of going in the right direction. This year was, I think, the first year we've split your audit into 2 weeks. There were a couple reasons for that. Part of it was a little selfish on our part. It helps us kind of split that workload a little bit. We're not trying to compress all of that stuff into 1 week. It was also something that I think was probably going to be more beneficial for you guys to kind of get some of this information early on. So when we came out the first week, we looked at a lot of different items, primarily from that USFR and federal compliance type area. And we were able to give some of our recommendations just sort of verbally at that point. So that, you know, come July, August, September, when we were first starting to look through these items, we could actually give you advice that you could put into place before you got halfway through the year. This is one of those things where sometimes you're going to see some findings that were the same as last year and the year before, and it's because it takes 2 or 3 years to completely clear these. Because we come out, we tell you something went wrong in October, well, by then, you might have already done it wrong. So you can't fix it for the year we're sitting here. So then you have to fix it for the next year. Well, next year we're auditing for this year. So sometimes it can take 2 or 3 years. And we're hoping we can kind of help you by coming in earlier, eliminate some of that time frame and catch things a little earlier. So, like I say, that first visit was mostly the travel, the student attendance, you know. Then we came back and kind of finished up all those areas along with other things like looking at your cash receipts, looking at student activities receipts and expenditures, things like that. Federal compliance was almost completely done during our first visit. We just had some follow-up items that we finished up while we were out this time. But we're looking at a lot of things like, are you spending the monies the way you're supposed to spend them according to the federal government? Are you only providing services to those people who are eligible? So if you're giving, you know, school lunch to someone for free, are they actually eligible to receive that free school lunch? Things like that. So we did a lot of that in the first visit. And then the financial statement items are really the ones we do now. So this is really where we're in the meat of all of those financial items, which tend to have fewer findings, fewer exceptions, but they have kind of a higher risk. So they're kind of bigger areas, and we do still have some of these in work. I actually have 2 crew members sitting kind of behind the curtain over there that are still trying to complete some of these items and go through things that we just haven't fully finished yet. So this is still kind of a work in progress, and we'll kind of look at that as well. We did find some areas where we think that you guys have some room for improvement. And I would prefer to put it that way because I think you've already made a lot of strides from the last audit, and I'm seeing things going in the right direction. So these are really areas where we think there's just some areas you can do some more improvement. We did see, once again, a lot of issues kind of with student attendance. I will say this is probably the most common area for school districts to have these kind of exceptions. You know, it's just an error-prone area. You're talking about a group of staff that are asked to do a lot of things, and they don't ever get to just sit and do them. So, you know, when I come in and I do my work, I sit down, I get to pull my computer out, I get to focus on one thing, and when I'm done, I put it away and I can go to the next. When you think of your typical administrative assistant at a school, they're going to come in and get the paperwork to put in a new kid. And they're going to start filling it out, and then you're going to get the parent calling because their kid's going to be late. Or you get the kid coming in with a runny nose that wants to see the nurse. Or the million of things that will distract you, move you away, and that's where errors happen. So it's just kind of a common thing, and then they tend to be positions that turn over a little more often. You have people moving in and out of them. So I will say, ooh, what did I do? I hit a magic button. Okay. I found the button. We were looking for that button earlier. So there were a few different things. I'm not going to go through all of them, especially because student attendance, since we're kind of touching on those student files, I don't want to get into too much detail. But I did want to kind of show kind of some of the areas where we can see some improvement. There were a lot of these that involved enrollments. So I'm thinking we might see a repeat of those because obviously when we came out and did this test work this year, we wouldn't necessarily have been able to tell you what was wrong in time for you to correct it for this year. And then a few with the withdrawals, and then just a couple with those partial day attendance calculations. So we got rid of, you guys managed to get rid of the really big one from last year, and that's a big, I know, painful change, but I think it was a benefit for the district to be able to get that corrected. I just kind of pulled a few examples of what some of those are like, so you get kind of an idea, because when we talk about exceptions, it sounds like there's something really horribly bad, and you know, some of these are kind of more common errors or just human error type things. So when we were looking at these, we look at the entries, and according to the USFR guidance, you have to maintain documentation that the student enrolling is a resident of the state of Arizona. And so for 5 of the 15 we looked at, that documentation wasn't there. I don't know if that means the students weren't actually residents of Arizona. I have a feeling, and we were able to kind of look at other documents to say that they probably were. It's just you're missing those pieces of paper. For withdrawals, there was one withdrawal where there was a document missing. And this might be that it's in another file. It might have been accidentally shredded or misplaced. There's no way to tell what happened to it, but then we can't really tell if everything was done because we don't have the document we rely on to look at for that. And then those kind of partial day absence errors. So there were 5 where they weren't reported correctly, where you actually ended up overstating absences in total. And a lot of those have to do more with just, you know, when the student leaves, are they getting signed out and then getting recorded into that system at the correct time. So it's kind of where those errors are coming in. I will say that I know the district is working on putting in place almost like a mini audit system, which I really appreciate, by the way, how quickly everybody tries to respond to these errors. So I know they're putting in a kind of system to go out and go school site by school site, pull a selection of these enrollment records and withdrawal records and student records and just check them. They're going to do exactly what we do when we go out, and if they find something missing, it's a whole lot easier 3 weeks into the school year to ask a parent to bring you that documentation than it is a year and a half later to explain why you don't have it. So I think that's going to significantly help that. We looked at a few other areas where we had a couple items that we noted. So in cash receipts, there's a lot of guidance in the USFR as to how the money needs to be tracked and brought in. So when we were looking at that, we pulled just kind of 5 of various things. And for 5 of the student activity receipts we looked at, 3 of 5, sorry, thank you. There was no like cash collection report that showed kind of an inventory. I think, you know, it was like, one of them might have been like a sale of pencils. So there should be something where you say, okay, we started with 50 pencils, we sold 25 pencils, so at the end we should have 25 pencils, and if we sold them for $1 a piece, then we should have $25. And it's just a method of kind of reconciling to what you have versus what kind of money you collected. And so for 3 of those, there wasn't that documentation available for us to review. And then for one of them, there was no receipt to kind of show when the money came in, who brought it in, that sort of thing. We had a couple coding errors when we were looking at this. So these are really starting to get into kind of the minutia of how things are put into the general ledger system. So for one of them, I believe the purchase was something that should have been coded to postage, and it was coded to freight. It was that kind of level of detail where, as a financial statement auditor, I really wouldn't be concerned, because on the face of the financial statements, it would be fine. But for the USFR compliance, you have to go down and follow their adopted chart of accounts, and so it gets pretty detailed there. And it's kind of the similar situation with the revenue. This revenue was coded into kind of a tuition revenue code, when it was actually really a different kind of payment from another district. So on the face of the financial statements, it's fine, and the money came in, you know, it's a valid revenue, all of that was correct, it's just not coded in that chart of accounts. A couple other little items, and we've actually had a couple drop off even this morning, because this is one of those things where, let's say we're missing a document, and it turns out it's actually sitting in somebody's desk drawer because it fell out of the file folder. Well, if we see that, we can clear an exception pretty easily. And so we've had a couple here. I know because I talked to Mr. Murray earlier about some of these, and he's going to see some of them are not on there now because of that. But we do still have 1 out of 12 purchases we looked at that are kind of in that oral quote range where we didn't see documentation of those quotes. And then when we were looking at the inventory listings, they have almost everything we need, but they don't have the purchase document numbers. And I believe some of them are actually even missing the page, like page totals, which is one of those little detail requirements in there that you have to have these totals on every page, not just a total on a whole document. But I need to verify that one before we finalize all of these. In the federal programs, we have, I'm not even quite sure how to explain this requirement, but when you're doing your allocation to determine which schools get how much Title I funding, you have to go in and calculate which schools have the greatest need, which is normally based on low-income students. And so for one of those, the total count of children in attendance at that school was not entered correctly into that form, which adjusted their percentage of low-income students, but it didn't change anything in how the money should have been allocated. So it's kind of one of those, it's a very technical little error, but it didn't ultimately affect anything in the program kind of situations. We also looked then, of course, at the financial statement ones. We have just a couple things here. There's one of 50 payroll records that we looked at where the pay was done on kind of this notation on a new hire checklist, which did not agree with the amount in the original contract. And without like formal documentation, we go back to the original contract as being the amount that should have been paid. So there's a calculation error somewhere in there. And then the other one is you had a couple bank accounts that are zero balance, inactive, not in use, and they just didn't go through the formal closure policy yet. So we're recommending those get closed this year, clear those off. We do have, as I said, people working, so we have some things outstanding. Right now, we don't know whether or not there will be any kind of significant exceptions or findings in them. One of them is we review the cash reconciliation with the county treasurer, and there's a lot going on with that. For most people, I think you think of a bank reconciliation, you think of your home account, and you know, you have a bank account, you have your check register, you're done. Well, in this case, you actually have your cash that's sitting at the county treasurer in a big pooled, ginormous account. And then you have a county school superintendent that's tracking all of your funds in that account. So you might have 40 buckets of money in that account. Well then, you guys here at the district have to figure out how much of that cash is really in which one. You have to go through, find all your outstanding checks, outstanding deposits, and then determine if anybody in that process has made an error. So it's a little more complicated than just looking at a couple numbers, unfortunately, and I think we're probably looking at least another week or two before we have an answer on that one, just because of how much is going on between those. The internal service fund is still outstanding. That's your EBT, and it is part of the district's books because they do exist solely for the benefit of the district, but it's kind of obviously managed and held off-site, and there's a few detailed review items we haven't really gotten through to be able to determine everything on that one. So that one's still a little outstanding.
The one thing I'll say about EBT, the account is reconciled. We have a few questions for the outside CPA. He's working on that, on reconciling items, but it actually is properly reconciled and it appears to be appropriately tracked for the fiscal year. So,
yeah, which I think was the biggest concern in prior years. So, that's, yeah. We also, have you finished the journal entry?
start scanning. The big box coming my way next. So.
Yeah, so there's a couple little things there. We do go through and look at all the journal entries and make sure nobody's, putting in money backwards or things like that. We also look at your AFR and ensure that all the information that was submitted there actually agrees to your accounting records. And that is something we have to do as a manual, like line by line item. So that one takes a little bit of time. But I don't think we've really seen anything significant there. I think there might have been a budget amount that was not put in at the full amount, but we're still kind of in the process of that one. The compensated absence reporting, that's your sick payout or vacation payout, the leave time. And that one is still a work in progress. There may be some, we're seeing some areas where the listing that we originally got is not fully updated, or maybe doesn't have all the information it needs to. So there may be a couple exceptions coming in on that one, just because there's some, where maybe somebody started with more hours than what the documentation says they did, that kind of thing. So we're still digging through that, but I don't think anything very severe on that. And then capital assets, we've gone through most of it. We're just kind of doing those last few little tests and tie out and make sure it's all good to go, but I think it was looking pretty good so far on that as well. So, when you look at this, it sounds like a lot of things wrong. That's why I always feel like I come up here. But, there's a lot of areas where, we're seeing significant improvement. We're not seeing some of the big cash items we were worried about. Student attendance, although there's some findings, I think those have gone down this year. And I think the severity level of a lot of what we're seeing has gone down to where it's more human errors that maybe you need a system in place to catch some of it, and less something where your system is failing you. Because that's really more of what we're concerned about is you're human, you're going to have mistakes. But you should have a system that catches the big ones. And I think we're seeing that it's kind of getting there to where most of those are getting caught. Moving forward, obviously, we walk out that door and I know people think, oh great, the auditors are gone, now we can go bother Kelly, we can go bother everybody. But we're gone but not forgotten, hopefully, because I'm still going to be calling for information. I'm still going to be trying to get things, and they're still going to have to do a lot of work towards the financial statements. So we're going to work to finalize those over the next few weeks. After that, we can get a draft copy of the financial report, comprehensive annual financial report, out to the district. That one has a due date, December 31st, 2017. And that's like the last possible moment it can be submitted. But we need it kind of before then. We're shooting for a date no later than mid-December on that. And then the USFR and the single audit reporting package, where most of these kind of exception things get reported, is not due until March. So that one we have a little bit more time frame, so you may even still be getting bothered in January for items. And it's because we want to try and make sure that when we report that, we're being as accurate as possible. We don't want to write you up for something that is sitting on somebody's desk right now. And we want to make sure we're including all the information correctly when we do. So just remember we're still going to be there and bothering everybody for a while. And I think that was a very quick, by the way, that was like the quickest I've gone through what was 2 weeks worth of, 50-hour week kind of, 5 people kind of work. But that's what we've done. Do we have questions?
Do you anticipate any single audit items based on the review that you've done so far? I know you have till March, but I'm just curious.
So the question, just in case everybody didn't hear, is, do we have any single audit findings we anticipate? As far as the federal compliance, I don't see anything that I think will end up rising to that level. I think there are other communication methods for the one finding that we do see there. As far as for the financial statement portion of that, what we call Section 2 part of the letter, I don't know. I can't say, just because with everything going on with that cash reconciliation, if it goes one way, then there's nothing. If it goes another way, then there could be significant ones again. So I'm not sure, and Mike is actually the one in charge of that area because it's pretty complex. I don't know if you have anything.
No, we're just, Kelly and I are kind of working with the county and with your financial software company to try and figure out kind of, I don't know, there's some kind of issue that we're just trying to work through it right now. And so it could be nothing, or it could be something that, again, it just, we have to kind of resolve. But we're not anticipating any major concerns right now. However, if something does come up, then we'll be sure to update management and the board of any changes and what happens.
I have 2 more questions.
Yeah, go ahead.
So, how often or does the USFR change, or the federal compliance rules change? How often does that happen?
So on the compliance side, the Office of Management and Budget, under the President, releases a new compliance supplement every year. And so they update, sometimes they add regulations, sometimes they take some out, sometimes they combine them, it just depends. Typically they only do like a major update every 5 to 10 years. And so they did a major update 2 years ago for the 2016 compliance supplement. And they combined everything into what's called uniform guidance. You've probably heard that term before. And so that became also known as a super circular. And so kind of combined a lot of regulation, got rid of some that wasn't considered necessary. And so for 17, there wasn't much of an update over the 16 compliance level, but there were a few changes. And then on the USFR side, this is kind of, the Auditor General releases the USFR typically about 2 months after the year's over. So you're basically getting audited, and they do update it every year. They add a few new questions every year and take off a few questions that they don't consider to be as applicable anymore. So sometimes findings will come up because you didn't realize you're supposed to be doing it this way until they told you 2 months after the year was over. So yeah, both of those get updated every year. And so we do obtain new copies of the supplement and uniform guidance, or the USFR to do that test work.
So next year, when we have our new financial reporting system in place at this time next year, is that something that accepts those kind of updates automatically?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, so typically what happens is, I understand you guys are going to Visions,
Vision.
correct? And so typically what happens is the Auditor General will come out with some kind of new guidance. Like recently they just came out with new coding structures to where you had to break out the JTED or the vocational expenditures in more detail. And so the Visions will provide updates to the users to update their system. And so and typically that's done every year, or sometimes with Visions if there's certain typically there's a much larger user group for visions.
Right.
So if there are concerns or reports that need to be run, you're not typically having to build them from scratch. You can usually reach out to the user groups. And we're pretty involved with those user groups as well, and going to Tyler conferences and talking on them.
So I understand it. The issue with the county with reconciliation is software-based?
It's somewhat software-based because what's happening is right now, we just had a discussion with the county school superintendent's office this morning. At most districts, the district maintaining their system. The CSS almost maintains a mirror system of what the district has, but they're kind of sharing information back and forth, and the county is kind of on its own because they're real hard cut off on June 30th. They're usually in some kind of large system that doesn't necessarily talk to vision, so they're kind of on their own. But then you at least have the CSS, the county school superintendent's office, will help you kind of reconcile the district records to the county records. And unfortunately, because the county school's office currently doesn't support IFAS, they don't actually maintain any records for you. So what we're trying to do is reconcile the district records, what Kelly's having to do is reconcile the district records straight to the county records with minimal help from the county school superintendent's office. They can help get reports from the treasurer, but they're not necessarily with any other district in this county. They're maintaining a copy of that vision software or a different version of it, but they're able to reconcile those two, the district software to the CSS software back to the county software. And right now, you're kind of missing that middle help. Does that sound about right, Kelly? That's what I got from the conversation this morning. So with going to the new system, which I understand it'll January 1st, it kind of starts mirroring, so you'll kind of be both systems, and then it'll be fully going July 1 of 18. That sounds right. Yeah.
Also, in my world, I deal a lot with GAAP, generally accepted accounting practices. Yeah. Where would you characterize the district based on your initial look as being with what a standard business would have as far as a task set put on it by an auditor?
Yeah. Yeah, I'm assuming you have a for-profit business.
Yes.
Somewhere. Okay.
Yes. And I have nonprofit experience. So.
Okay. And so that's kind of where essentially we're coming out to the same place. We want to come out where the financial statements are materially free from fraud or misstatement due to error or fraud. So we're basically trying to get to that point. And I would say that even based on the financial system that's currently in place, we can get to that point. We anticipate providing a clean, unmodified opinion of both the financial statements and of the single audit. We have to give an opinion on both, the general control for both. So we anticipate getting to that point because the systems are in place to provide that level of assurance. As far as capital assets, we have support for this. Cash, we have support. And so we're able to take your financial statements, present them in accordance with
Actually, with GAAP. Ultimately, they get presented in accordance with both GAAP and GASB.
Yeah. So there's a whole other set of principles on top of joint accepted accounting principles. Now we're taking your financial statements and presenting them under what's governmental auditing standards board, and they have their own standards that we're required to present or need.
So you would characterize the audit that you're performing on the district as a much finer standard than what a standard business would go through?
Yeah, because typically with a business, you're kind of just going with to making sure the numbers are correct. Can you provide support for cash? Okay, that agrees. Let's do some analytics on your revenue expenditures. With what the state requires on top of a financial audit, being the USFR audit, we're digging into things that I'm not really all that concerned on a material level that your student activities aren't being done correctly. But I get to go and examine, kids voting on did the kids agree to vote to buy jackets for the teachers? Like, I mean, you know, we're thinking about stuff like that, that from a business standpoint, you're not really getting to that, some of that detail. But because the USFR requires us to get to details into some of these areas, you know, we're having to look at, you know, oh, Johnny left the school 15 minutes early, he should be a 0.25 absence. You know, from a business standpoint, that probably doesn't make as much sense. So I would say yes, it is more detailed.
And to date, have you noticed anything that would be a notable deficiency in the audit?
Well, no, I would say last year we had the two larger concerns with the EBT and with the attendance. And right now we don't have either one of those concerns. We think that both of those are being done appropriately now. We're still waiting on some questions with the EBT, but we think we can get to a resolution. Right now, our only concern is making sure that cash accounting reconciliation is done appropriately. There was a consultant who was brought in to help do some review, and I think we're just kind of trying to retrace her work and trying to make sure that it was what was suggested to be done makes sense within the software. So that's right now we're just working through some of that.
Okay, I'm sort of following up on something John said, but on your presentation, am I assuming that in December, when you hit these other areas, we will get another review, another presentation?
Not necessarily from us. I mean, we could come out if you wanted us to again. But typically what does happen at some point will be the final audit reports will be provided to the district. In December, it'll be the comprehensive annual financial report, and that doesn't actually have any of the findings in it. That's just a summary of your financial statements, and that helps you meet your continuing bond disclosures. However, in March, February-March timeframe, is when you'll get a final copy of the single audit and the USFR, and that'll have your findings listed in there at that point.
See, what I'm concerned about is, like John said, are there any significant issues you've identified? And in December, you're going to have gone over 6 other areas, and we'd be concerned about any significant issues that might pop up. And the other thing I'd be concerned about, I'd like to know about, is do we have reoccurring issues? Are there issues we're looking at this year that we may have looked at for 3 straight years? Do you understand where I'm coming from?
No, I do understand where you're coming from, yeah.
And I have no way of doing that. I have to rely on you to provide me that information.
And yeah, and what we can do,
Well, yeah, so we do provide a much more detailed finding sheet to management. Like we normally communicate everything into management. And then because management kind of actually has the responsibility over all of this, and then they get to go and communicate that with you. We come in and do this as part of a service of the audit to allow us to just kind of shortcut and communicate to you. But we'll provide a detailed finding list up to this point. And then any findings that come up, we would also provide in that kind of, it's not a formal finding, it's not a formal document that would be released to the public, but it would be something that management would have available to then come and address the board and say, okay, they found these other items, and here's what we're going to do to fix them. So we would be providing that regardless, and that's something I just like to do because I think you need the detail, which we obviously can't communicate in here because I can't say, oh, Mary Jane was out of school and didn't get marked out of school. That wouldn't be appropriate in a public forum. So that will be provided to management, and we would, any findings we have will be communicated quite instantly to them, because obviously we want to make sure we can address them and, you know, you guys can get them addressed.
I mean, I can tell you right now, we ended last year with around 30 findings, and currently we're right around 25 to 26. So there's a few less than last year. Some of the attendance stuff is fairly similar, but then some things like last year we had a finding over transportation for not using quite the right number of days, and that finding was gone. You know, last year we had a couple, a travel reimbursement finding that's not there anymore. So it kind of goes up and down. But I can tell you that that same finding that was on there about the reconciliation of student activities as far as the cash receipts go, reconciling, having a list of account of things before and after, that's a repeat finding from prior year. So that can be something that can be, and we had a conversation with the high school bookstore clerk, and she is aware now of what she needs to do, so hopefully that will be corrected going forward.
Yeah, and then some of those, to some degree, you're always going to have a few of these exceptions, because there's no way you're ever going to be perfect. And I think, talking to Mr. Murray today, he mentioned that he wants to strive for perfection with that understanding that you're never really going to make it. And that's where I think the mini audits will help reduce the student attendance findings. I don't know if you can ever completely eliminate those, because there's too many factors going into some of those. And I would say it's probably about equivalent to most of the districts I audit. Like most of these findings I'm seeing here so far today are really what I see at almost every district we go to a greater or lesser degree. And I have some that are in much worse shape, and only a few that are in a much better shape. And they're generally tiny little districts that have a little more control over some of these areas.
Are the notes in the CAFR, are those similar to like the 25 findings you're at so far? Because I find a lot of detail in those notes in the comprehensive annual. So are those different?
They are.
Okay.
Yeah, the notes in the comprehensive annual financial report provide detail of what's in the financial statements. And so, yeah, these findings will end up being that USFR checklist that comes out.
Okay.
Hey, Melanie, on the Title I compliance where you had a discrepancy in the student count and the percentage, when you're calculating your student count, are you calculating kindergarten through 12 or preschool through 12?
That's a good question.
Because I think the percentage that you came up with, go ahead.
It should be kindergarten through 12, I believe, because you don't include because the preschool kids who are enrolled and receiving funding for are special education students, right? And then the preschool kids who are enrolled but are not special education, the district that receive funding for, so probably it's just K through 12.
Yeah, but we can double check that. That was actually work done on a preliminary visit by a different staff member, so I offhand do not recall how she got there.
I think I can help clarify that one,
Okay.
remove that finding, because in the federal grant application, it's pre-K through 12. And there's a separate line item for pre-K that wasn't accounted for in the percentage that you listed there. So I think we'll be able to clear that one out.
Okay, yeah, and we can definitely work with you on that and clear that up.
Yeah, the findings aren't final until they are. So if the documentation shows up or additional information comes up that allows us to take off the finding, we're happy to do that. The more findings there are, the harder. We have to work harder when there's findings, because we actually have to sit there and write them up and make them sound pretty and legible to people to understand. So the more findings we can clear up, the happier we'll be, and the happier we'll be too.
And like I say, we wanted to accurately reflect what was wrong, so that then you guys, when you're making your decisions, have that kind of final information and not include information that was us maybe making a mistake in our calculations. And as I mentioned, you're all human. We're human as well. So all of our work, all of this has not been reviewed by him yet. So everything I do actually gets almost a mini audit by him after I go and audit everybody else. And so, if he comes through and says, hey, you reversed a number here, this is actually okay, then we clear those findings as well. Because, I will admit that we can be human, we can make a mistake. We do try and have our controls to eliminate it, but please feel free and tell me if I have missed something, because we want to be right too.
I brought up that redundancy issue for a reason, Audits tell you what you did wrong, and we're all going to correct what we did wrong. I mean, that's our goal. But if it doesn't tell us this is a redundant issue from last year or from 2 years ago, then we don't know that we've got a systemic problem. if I make sense.
Yeah, it does. And so currently the district has all of the prior USFRs. They're available. So if somebody wants a project, I mean, I can kind of look through and tell you exactly what I think repeated, but if you really want a project, you can kind of lay out 3 or 4 years worth of USFRs or have somebody else assigned to do that and kind of go through and determine if you've got some repeat findings that keep on going from year to year to year that aren't being addressed. So that's something that's not too hard to do.
Yeah, and the more significant ones, the ones that go in the single audit reporting package, will have, so if you had it in 2016 and then you have it again in 2017, those do get recorded in the report to say, yes, this is not corrected, see finding whichever it is in the current year. So those more significant ones will end up in there. If that maybe helps too, with some of that to see.
No other questions? Thank you so much for your presentation, and I think this is the second year that it's been a public meeting. I think it's fantastic to do it in public. So happy our reporter's here so you can make a nice report of it in the paper. Thank you.
And really thank you guys for having us and allowing us to do this, because it is, for me, it's always exciting to come here. It's always, everybody's very friendly, everybody, works really hard with us, and it's kind of a nice, I know this will sound weird, but a fun audit. I know you guys are going, it's not fun, but for us, it's fun. It's exciting for us to get to meet everybody and be welcomed, which is very nice.
Thank you.
Cross that off. I made it work before. Yeah. Nope, there it goes.
Do you have any other announcements?
If I can just speak to the mention of a mini audit or mini audits within the district. We are committed to developing a schedule and a procedure as to how to accomplish that. It's not going to start Monday, but it will start in the near future to allow some of our staff here on site to take a more kind of a proactive role versus reactive in going out to the sites and supporting the sites and helping our staff members make sure that just to be an additional support to this whole process. It is very complex, and we know our AAs and office staff are extremely busy and pulled in 20 different directions. So we're committed here at the district level to put a mini audit system in place so that we can dispatch some of our staff members on a weekly basis to the sites. In my mind, as we get it put down on paper and we finalize what this will look like, we will take the schools and divide them in such a way that we have staff members that, going to each site and looking for specific things to address what we're seeing here. And with your support in the school buildings, please use us to help you. And as we go through the auditing process of pulling documents, and as we find maybe incomplete residency forms or enrollment forms or whatever it may be, just know that we're helping you, and we're coming to not hit you over the head with a hammer, but we're here to support you. It's not going to be a finger pointing exercise, so I want that to be perfectly clear. If any of my staff point fingers, I want to know about that, because we're not here to point fingers. And I expect the same in return from our school staff. We're all in this together. We're all LHUSD employees. Our paychecks come from the same place. So please know that we're committed to support you and help in this process, so that in the next year or two, because we're already now in November of this year, which will be audited next year, know that within a couple of years' time, we're committed to touch every file and do our best to make sure that all documentation is there and present. So I just want that to be known, especially to the school sites. We're not coming with pointed fingers. We're coming there to simply help and assist in this process. So please be patient with us as we try to develop this. There may be times during this process where, and there will be times, let me clarify that, where we solicit your input. Because how we do things and when we show up and what we're asking for may not always work for you. So please be patient though, and knowing that we also have a job so that we can provide the auditors with hopefully some very polished records that they can go through. So that's our commitment. That's my commitment. I've had a conversation with a few staff here, and they're committed in doing this. If we can work 4 days here and be on the road, so to speak, the 5th day of the week, whatever 5th day that might be, Monday through Friday, and on your campus, we ask for your support in allowing us to do that and assist you at your individual sites. So more to come with that as we move. I don't see this happening until after the first of the year, because this is a busy time for all celebrations, and the kids are crazy this time of year because they're excited about what's coming up. And I know your staff, I know our staff are the same way. But in January, we hope to have a pretty comprehensive plan in place and a strategy on how to address this moving forward. So that's all I had to address that.
Thank you. I think that's fantastic. All right, if there's no other announcements, I don't have any. Our next board meeting will be November 21st at 6 p.m. Do we have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Kathy Cox,
Yes.
John Maston,
Yes.
Pat Rooney,
Yes.
Alan Ward,
Yes.
Nicole Cohen.
Yes. Thank you.